Hello, today is the 25th of June 2023, and we'll talk about two architects. Harry Seidler, whose centenary is today. He would have been 100 years old if he lived until 2023. And Alvaro Siza, who is 90 years old also today, the 25th of June 2023. Let's read a little bit about Harry Seidler. Was an Austrian-born Australian architect who is considered to be one of the leading exponents of modernism's methodology in Australia and the first architect to fully express the principles of the Bauhaus in Australia. Australia, as we know, has very important modern architects, but Seidler, who relocated from Austria to Australia, was one of the first modernist architects of this country, which has very important architects. If you are so kind to turn off the microphone, unless you want to say something, thank you. So Seidler designed more than 180 buildings, and he received much recognition for his contribution to the architecture of Australia. Seidler consistently won architectural awards every decade throughout his Australian career of almost 50 years across the varied categories. His residential work from the 1950s, his commercial work from the 1964, and his public commissions from the 1970s. He was a controversial figure throughout his long career as he regularly publicly criticized planning authorities and the planning system in Sydney. And maybe we can get inspired by him, because I think architects have to fight for what they believe in, and they shouldn't allow bureaucracy, if possible, to dwarf them. Sorry about this picture. It's not very, big resolution, but you see Gropius on the left and Sidler on the right together. Here he was, Harry Seidler. Here he is again. So born in Austria, but being active and very, very, busy at building in Australia. We begin with this house, Rose Seidler house. He built several houses for his own family, for members of his own family. I think she was his sister. 1948, 1950, Rose Seidler house. And here it is. So from 1948, 1950, so more than 70 years ago, here we have an example of a vigorous, convincing modernism. If this house was built today, we would have said, yes, let's go for it. It's a good house for our time, but it was built 70 years ago. So, architecture, like other arts, is capable sometimes to transcend time. The Rose Seidler house, built by Harry Seidler in Australia, 1948, 1950. Austria exported important architects, if I can say so. There was Schindler, there was Neutra. Here we look at the work of Harry Seidler, but Schindler and Neutra emigrated to the United States, while Harry Seidler to Australia. He came from a well-to-do family, and that's why he was able to build at the beginning for his own family or members of his own family. This is the plan of the house. This is a modernism which was not haunted by the problems we have. So there was a sense of confidence that animated the architecture of those years, not just in Australia, not just the architecture of Harry Seidler. Usually the architecture of mid-century, mid-20th century, and not just architecture, but also design, has freshness, which is inviolable even from today, and which can be inspiring even for today. We see also the presence of art, you know, chromatically rich, which animates that patio, if we have to call it so, on the superior level. And also the presence of stone. So there is the modernistic box, but there is also the presence of organicity, the organic material, stone. So I think, you know, surprisingly perhaps, you know, after so many years of modernism, this kind of, you know, total confidence in its values is not so often present today, I think. Times did change, of course. So the Rosa Sidler house by Harry Seidler. Now another house built for a member of his family, the Julian Rose house, 1949, 1954, the proximity of Sydney. This one also, I think, is an example of an architecture that is, you know, quite convincing in its modernism. You can imagine at that time, no, 1949, it would have been, and it was probably much more, you know, surprising, so to speak. Look at the car and look at the house. The house has a modernism which the car doesn't have. The idea to move the stair so sculpturally and so obviously outside of the perimeter of the house per se, I think it's a good idea, because the stairs do bring an element of sculpturalness and plastic vigor, which most buildings do need. Steel structure. Harry Seidler. He built also in Vienna. So if you arrive in Vienna, you can find a very tall building built by him there. And I think it is shown in this presentation. Another house for Marcus Seidler, again, a Seidler, 1951, 1953. Here again, we see elements of what we already saw, the presence of, you know, artwork, part of architecture. And this is also something we don't do so often these days, but I don't know why. there seems to be a certain difference between the ground floor and the floor above. As you can see, is the prism of the floor above that sits on a base which is more free, and it's an idea, you know, to create this differentiation between the second floor and the first floor, or the first floor and the ground floor. It depends how you call them. Now the Blues Point Tower in Sydney, 1958, 1961, Harry Seidler, and the tower it is. I personally am seduced by this early modernism, if we are to call it so, but I think we can, you know, mid-century modernism, honesty in the expression of its functions, simplicity which is real, is not mimicked, and I think it's a tower which stands the test of time. You see the Opera of Sydney by John Hudson on the lower right corner, and the tower by Harry Seidler, with a bridge between them. Sydney. The rendering of the time, as simple and unassuming as the building itself. I mean, you know, the building is assuming because of its height, but otherwise its expression is, architectural expression is rather reticent. And I think this is a quality. Australia Square Tower, 1961, 1967, also in Sydney. This one is different. Harry Seidler again. More than 60 years ago, it was built. Another apartment building called Aquarius in Sydney, 1963, 1965, but I don't have pictures. Then Harry and Penelope Seidler, that's their own house in Keira, Sydney, 1966, 1967. Sitting by Charles Eames, about whom we talked the other day. A chimney with, you know, the fireplace with the stonework. And this interplay between concrete and stonework, I think, is a positive thing. Two forms of rigidity, two forms of solidity. But while concrete was and is a conglomerate, as Frank Lloyd Wright called it, the stone is not a conglomerate, of course. Art, sculpture around the house. Again, the love story between architecture and the plastic arts continues and should continue in our time as well. Although we sometimes forget that they are sister arts, architecture and painting and sculpture. Maybe this was his wife. Harry Seidler's wife. Condominium apartments, Acapulco, Mexico, 1969, 1970. I spent a few days in Acapulco once, and I have to say, Mexico is not what Donald Trump thought. It's a country, a very proud country. Yes, it has problems, but so does the United States, and so does every other country on this earth. But I met very proud people and speaking English perfectly and dancing diabolically. Yes, I do have to say that I never saw, and I never even imagined human beings dancing as they danced. Once I went to a disco, to a club, and I received a lesson of unbelievable vivacity. They were like fires, like snakes, like. Then I decided to never dance. Not that I danced a lot before, but no. For that, you have to allow them to be themselves. Incredible, and not just a pair I saw like this. Many. The music is in their veins, in their blood. Anyway, this is the apartment building in Acapulco. Harry Seidler. Of course, it's for the well-to-do and for the tourists. But anyway, Edmund Barton building, formerly trade group offices in Canberra, Australia, 1970-1974. A large, kind of headquarters building. Business, it's like a fortress of money making, a capitalist fortress. It's huge, as you can see. He was a skillful architect, no doubt. Maybe his architectural language is not too surprising, but he didn't make too many mistakes. This kind of architecture at that time was also practiced in the United States. The Embassy of Australia in Paris, France, 1973-1977. It can only be in Paris, of course, with the silhouette of Tour Eiffel in between the two parts of the building, but the building is interesting itself. The building of the French embassy, of the Australian embassy in France. Great concrete work, plastically engaging, sculptural. Harry Seidler, Paris, 1970s, the Embassy of Australia. Okay, that was it. He built other buildings, but this was a small commemoration now on the day of his centennial. Let's wish him happy birthday, and let's talk a little bit about it if you want.